Hey chaps, I hope you're all well. We are on a roll. This is like the third episode or something in a matter of weeks, which is incredible for me. And I'm sticking to it. It's good. I'm looking forward to what's coming up next. For today, though, we're going to be wrapping up the episode 16 that we started last week before we move on to bigger and better things like entity and object management over the coming weeks. So, buckle in, let's get this wrapped up and then we can focus on more exciting things. However, I don't want to take away from some of the good stuff that we're going to be doing today either, because it is all very valuable and makes the editor experience better too. And it's going to make our lives easier moving forward. So, anyway, without further ado, I'll stop rambling on and we'll get to it. So, to get us started today, we're going to go to our game editor project. We're going to go to our Form 1 CS, right click and view designer. And then what we're going to do is we're going to set some icons for our new buttons that we made in the last part of this episode. So first of all, let's start with our tile paint button here. We're going to click on him, and then we're going to set an icon for this button, and then for the next button we'll do the same thing. So to set an icon, all we need to do is set the image on the button in the properties window down here. So with the button selected, properties here, I'm going to go to image, and then I'm going to click the three dots here, the ellipses, for the image. And then all I'm going to do is click import, and then here I'm going to pick the image I want to use as the icon for that button. Both of these images, both of these icons I will link in the video description, so don't worry if you want to use the same ones I do as just some clear examples. You'll be able to pick them up quite easily. Okay, so for this one, for painting the tiles, I'm going to use a paintbrush icon. I'm going to open that one, and you'll see there's the icon here in the preview. And click OK. And there is my paintbrush icon for my painting tiles button. And then for our collision button here, I'm going to do the same thing. So I'm going to go to image, click the ellipses, click import, and then I'm going to use a barrier. So a barrier representing whether you can or cannot walk on something. I'm going to use a barrier icon for the collision button. Open, there it is in the preview, and then click OK. And there we have our new icons for our two new buttons. Give this a quick start to make sure that's working as we expect. Okie dokie, so there we have our two buttons, both of the icons we expect, and then toggling still works, doesn't affect anything. That just continues to behave as it did previously, but it's just a nice little feature, just have something to represent a visualization of the tool itself. So the next thing we're going to do is introduce some behavior, so that when you select a tool from up here, that will modify what is and isn't visible in the beneath section here. For example, when I'm trying to update the collision layer by using the collision tool, I don't really care about tile sets and previewing tile sets or their layers. I'll especially not care about any of those things when I'm trying to place objects when using the new object placement tool that will be coming soon. But of course, I still want to see all of this stuff when I'm painting tiles. So it is still relevant. So there are a few ways we can go about this. We can use a panel, and that would probably be the most encapsulated way of doing it. So we'd have a panel in here, and then we'll have a separate control for each view. So we'll have a control for the collision tool, for the tile paint tool, and the object tool. But it just gets a little bit more difficult to manage in Windows Forms. And to be honest, I think it'd just be quicker and easier to use a tab control, but with a few minor changes to make it not look so much like a tab control at runtime. So what do I mean by that? Well, if I drag in a tab control now, select tab control, drop that in here. So I got a couple of tabs here by default, tab page 1 and 2. So if I place a component in tab page 1, so goes tab page 2, you won't see that control anymore because it's showing you what you'd see on tab page 2. So you're designing each tab in the designer like this. It's very straightforward. Okay, so if you could imagine each tab page correlating back to a tool, so tab page 1 could be for the tile paint tool, tab page 2 could be for collision, and so on. The problem is I don't want the users to be able to manually change what tab they're on. I want selecting the tool to do that for them. So I want to just hide these tabs up here and just do the actual functionality behind the scenes of switching pages. But you can't do that out of the box with a tab control. That is the problem. So we need to make a custom one. Alright, so I'm going to delete this tab control and I'm going to introduce a custom tab control that will do that for us. Okay, delete that. Okay, so over in our game editor project, under the controls folder, where we have currently the tile set previewer and the tool strip radio button, we're going to right click on the controls folder, add new item. I'm going to create a class and we're just going to call this the toolbox. .cs. Okay, so this is just going to be a class that extends the tab control. We need to add a using statement for this, so control period using system Windows forms. Okay, so that is our toolbox tab control. Just give that a quick build. Head over to our designer, and you'll see we've got our toolbox control here now in the designer. Let's just click on him and drag him into the designer, just fill up the screen with him a little bit. So there we've just got our bog standard tab control. So back in toolbox CS, all we're going to do in here is implement a constructor which sets some special properties to some equally very special values, which I'll talk about. So let's go for the constructor now. So public toolbox. So in the constructor of our toolbox, which remember is a tab control, we're going to set some tab control properties to hide those header buttons. And the first one of those is going to be the appearance. So we're going to set appearance to flat buttons. Give that a save. Go back to the designer. What I'm going to do is delete this and just drop it back in so you can see what that actually means. Okay. Drop it in the toolbox once more. And you'll see the tab buttons have now gone very Windows 98 2000-esque. They've gone very flat. So that is step one complete, and I'll tell you why that was important in a moment. So back in the toolbox, the next step we're going to take is we're going to set the item size to a new system drawing.size. Luckily, Visual Studio just auto-completed that for me. So if I delete those, just go back to size, control period, system.drawing. I'm going to set this size to 0, 1. So that sounds really bizarre on the surface of things, but it'll make more sense in a moment when we set the final one, and I can talk about them all together. The last thing we're going to set is the size mode. Size mode is going to become text size tab size mode dot fixed. All that means is just going to stop the tabs themselves expanding, contracting to the size of the text that would live within them. Okay, so what does this mean altogether? Well, if I go back to the form, delete our toolbox, give that a build just to make sure we've got those properties, drag in the toolbox again, and you'll see we've just got essentially a blank panel. So how does that work, and how do we get that result from those properties we've just set? So just to talk about them really quickly. So talking about them slightly out of order, the first one I'm going to talk about is item size. Item size does have a minimum possible value of 1, 0 or 0, 1. We have, however, very consciously chosen 0, 1 over 1, 0 because in the event 0 is specified, that size will automatically be calculated. If we specify 1 on the y-axis, like we have, any space left over by the now incredibly small tab headers will now be stretched up and consumed by the panel itself. That, when combined with the flat buttons tab appearance, essentially means that the tabs are invisible and the user is unable to interact with them. And finally, size mode we are setting to fixed, just to make sure that the framework does not recalculate that item size. So if we head back to our designer, there's still one last problem we need to address with our toolbox. So as expected, we're no longer displaying the tab headers here, and if we run the editor, again, we're no longer displaying the tab headers here. The obvious problem we now face is that we cannot easily switch between the tabs to make changes to the individual tab pages. So ultimately, what we'd like to do is only hide the tab headers whilst the editor is running for real and not in the designer. If we head back to Toolbox CS, lucky for us, there is a handy boolean which exists in the control called design mode. It's just a simple boolean to tell us if we are in design mode or not. Due to the nature of how Windows Forms and the designer works, however, this will not work in the constructor. So what we need to do is place our code in a new place where it can be understood and interpreted correctly. In our case, this place is going to be in a method called onCreated or onCreateControl. So we're going to add an override here on createControl, and then we're going to take our 3 property assignments here and just place them in this method instead, and just remove our constructor. That build. Go back to our designer. I'm going to delete our existing toolbox and drop in a new one. So you can see that's still continuing to work as we expect. We now just need to encapsulate the logic to check if we are in the design mode. So back in Toolbox CS, in our onCreateControl method, we're just going to add a check for if we're not in design mode, then run this code as you did previously. Give that a build. Back to the designer. Let's delete it one more time. Drop in a new one. And you'll see we've got our tabs back that we can switch between. Launch the editor. And you'll see the tab headers are not displayed. Okay, so this now means we can easily switch between the tabs and modify the content, whilst the user in the editor itself will not see them. So now we're going to move on to transferring our components into tab pages. So first of all, let's give tab page 1 a better name and text to represent what it is, and that is going to be for the tile painting tool. Anywhere in the white space here for tab page 1, I'm going to click. Properties window on the bottom right, I'm going to scroll to name, and I'm going to call this tab tile painting tool. Okay, scrolling up to text now. I'm going to give this text tile painting tool. Excellent. So now I'm going to drag each of the components into this tab page and configure them appropriately. So starting with the combo box, I'm going to drag him in. Now before I do anything else, I'm going to snap him to the top left there, and I'm going to drag the width of him out to the very end. So why I'm doing that is because eventually, over maybe the next episode, before we move on to just tackling entities, I'm going to make it so we can split up this view and the editor view, so we can basically drag out left and right, make this side bigger than that side, and vice versa. Because it's helpful when you're looking at tile sets if you can see a bit more of the tile set and things like that. So it just makes sense to do that whilst we're here. So what I want to do really is when I'm dragging out this tab page size like this, I want this combo box to expand and contract with it. So let's undo that. And how we can do that is by selecting the combo box. I'm just going to scroll down to where it says anchor. And I want it to be anchored to the top left, but I also want it to be anchored to the right. Okay? So now if I select my toolbox, I can drag it around and you'll see it'll expand and it'll contract. But it'll also stay where it is vertically, and that's because I have an anchor to the bottom. Alright, so now let's drag in the edit tile set button, snap that underneath the combo box, drag that out too, and do the same thing with the anchor for that. Anchor, top, left, and right. Check that's working. Drag that around, also drag up and down. Yep, looks good. Okay, now I'm going to do the tile set previewer. Let's give myself a bit more vertical space. Let's bring the tile set preview over, snap him underneath the edit tile set, stretch that one out. Okay, and similarly, we want to anchor this one too. Let's anchor him, top, left, right, and I'm also going to anchor him to the bottom. Okay? And that's because when we expand the window, I also want to expand the view of the tile set as well, so he gets stretched vertically. See there, okay? Next, I also want to bring in the list box layers. So let's drag him over and snap him underneath the tile set previewer. Stretch him out. And then for anchoring this one, let's go to anchor. Here. For this one, we want to anchor to the left, the right, and the bottom. Okay, and that's because we want it to move up and down underneath the tile set preview, but we don't want its size to change. So we don't want it to be anchored to the top and the bottom, therefore stretch it down. Okay, so lastly, let's just move our toggle collision layer checkbox down to the bottom left and snap that there. And let's position our toolbox into the space on the left here. So let's drag him over. Snap him to the top, snap him to the left. Also drag in the width, see everything else comes with it, which is nice. Okay, and you'll see we've got quite a lot of padding here, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to stretch it out a little bit more to the left and snap it against the edge of the window. And do something similar here on the right, but not so that it overlaps with the editor. Yeah, so you see there it's overlapping slightly, ever so slightly at the bottom, but we don't want to do that. Let's drag it back in a little bit more. But I might change the size of it here in the properties window. just to make that a little bit easier on myself. Let's change this to 40, perhaps. Better. Okay, looks okay to me. Let's give that a quick run. So everything's here looking pretty normal. It's filling the space that we left behind at the top previously, which is nice. We can select our tile sets. Everything here looks pretty normal as well. It all still functions. If I drag the window around, nothing abnormal happening there. But what you have noticed there straight away is the toggle collision layer is not moving from his spot when I drag the window vertically. So what we can do is change that so he always sticks to the bottom of the window. So let's select our toggle collision layer checkbox. What I'm going to do, to the bottom here, find his anchor, and I'm going to change his anchor to bottom left, like so. Give that a run again. Now if you move him around, you'll see he sticks to the bottom of the window, and he doesn't move if I stretch out the window horizontally. That looks pretty good. There's one thing I'd like to do additionally, I think, and that is add a splitter in here so that we can change the size of the editor view here on the right and the toolbox view here on the left, but I'll save that for the next episode before we move on to entities. There's also some more fine tuning we can do in here to make sure that these go to the bottom, and therefore we can get the maximum possible view of the tile set as well. In fact, why don't we just go ahead and do that now? So let's select our list box layers. Let's drag them down to the very bottom of our toolbox here. Drag the height of our tile set previewer down. But additionally now, if we select our toolbox control itself, and then for the properties of the toolbox, we anchor that additionally to the bottom as well as the top and the left. That I run. What we should get now is if we drag this out like this, you'll see the list box layers at the bottom are moving down. But also, if we select a big tile set like this, we'll be able to get a better view of it by actually just stretching out the window at the same time. Okay, so that's a nice little addition we've got in there. However, why not go the whole hog and get our split container set up now so it's done and we never have to touch it again? I think we should do it. It's relatively low effort and we'll get a lot out of it as well. So, on the left in our toolbox, let's find a split container. Select him, drag him into the designer, but leave plenty of space so you can still select all the components around him. Okay, so that gives us two panels. These panels can be dragged and split to change the sizes of the two, so you can change the ratio, and that can also be done whilst the editor is running as well. That will allow us to expand this panel on the left, but also allow us to collapse it if we only care about the editor view, for example. This is really good when you've got a big tile set and you want to see more of it. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to select our editor control here, the grey one, drag him into panel 2, and then whilst we've still got him selected, let's scroll to find the dock property and then select fill, which is the big middle one here. And that'll just essentially fill panel 2 with the MonoGame editor control. Alright, with that done, let's change his position a little bit now just to fill up the rest of the space. So if we select panel 1, they're a little bit tricky to select the container itself. The easiest way I find is just to select a panel, and then in the properties drop down here, select the container itself, which in our case should be just split container 1. Alright, let's drag him down to the bottom right. Okay, then make him a little bit bigger, just so we can drop our toolbox into him. Let's drag it up a little bit as well. Alright, so now we're going to move our toolbox into panel 1. Fit him right to the very top left there. And then for now, let's just quickly drag in this checkbox into panel 1 as well. So with that done, select anywhere in the split panel container. The properties, find the container again, and then we're going to scroll to the dock property of the container itself. So, dock, and we'll change this to dock. Oh, dock fill. Okay, so now let's adjust the size of things as we see fit. So we've got our toolbox here. Let's drag it up a little more. Let's reposition our checkbox there. Let's re-update our position of the toolbox container as well. So it's there a little bit like that. More actually. Okay. It's maybe a little bit too much actually. There. To there. That doesn't look unreasonable. Okay, so now let's give them a quick run. So now we've got our split container that we can now drag around like this. But you'll see none of this is moving with it, so we'll make a change for that in a second. But you'll see it's updating the size of the editor view on the right. Alright, so there's one last thing we need to do to make that work as we'd like it to. Select our toolbox control here, go down to the anchor property. We now just need to make it anchor to the right as well. Okay, start up the editor one more time. Drag it out, and you'll see it changes appropriately with the size of the window. Also, if I change the split size like that, it stretches out too. The good thing is now, if I select a tile set, I can change the size of my view of that tile set, which is really, really handy with a particularly large tile set. Don't forget, we also have the ability to zoom in and out when we hold shift and use the mouse scroll wheel as well, which is handy. Okay, and I think that's pretty much it for the split container. Let's close that down. In fact, there is one thing I'd like to change very quickly, and that is I don't want this left panel here to change size when we adjust the size of the window. So if we drag out the window size like this, I want the left panel to remain the same size unless we explicitly split it up like that. So let's select my split container one more time. I think scroll down, and I'm going to change fixed panel. I'm going to select panel 1. Of course, you can give panel 1 and panel 2 a better name if you like. It doesn't really make a great difference. I don't think I'm going to be interacting with them in code. So, okay. So that's our split panel all set up. Lastly, all I want to do now is just make it so these tabs are active based on the button you up here, the tool you've selected. So over in Form1CS, I'm going to right click and view code. I'm going to scroll to the very bottom of this file where we have our handlers for those buttons, and now I'm going to change the tab index that we set when we click these buttons. But firstly, back in the designer, I'm going to give this toolbox a better name because we're going to be referring to it in code. So I'm just going to scroll down to name here, properties. I'm just literally going to call this toolbox, all lowercase. And then back in Form1CS, I'm going to say for the paint tiles, I'm going to say toolbox dot selected tab, or selected index rather, to 0. And then for the paint and collision, I'm going to say toolbox dot selected index equals 1. Simple as that. Let's give our editor a run. Okay, now so if I select my collision tool, bang, everything's disappeared, which paves the way for any tools in future that want to have their own views here. Okay, and that's pretty much it. And that about wraps up episode 16. I appreciate there was quite a lot of stuff to get through there, so I broke it out into 2 episodes. I hope you guys enjoyed that one, and I hope you're prepared for what's coming next, which is going to be moving on to things like entity management, etc. So we're moving on to objects and interactive things in the game world. I'm really, really excited about it, but there's a lot to get through, so please bear with. It's going to be a lot to absorb, but it's going to be fun. I'm looking forward to getting through it, and I hope you guys look forward to it too. Thanks for watching, chaps. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already. Otherwise, I will speak to you soon. Bye bye.